My husband canceled our 10th anniversary dinner, claiming he had an emergency client meeting. I watched through my car windshield as he walked into another woman's downtown condo with the vintage champagne and blue hydrangeas meant for me. He thought I would be waiting at home, scrolling through old photos and wondering when he'd return. Instead, I followed him to her doorstep with signed divorce papers and 10 years of deceit laid bare. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The look on both their faces when they opened that door is something I'll never forget. The digital clock on my dashboard read 8:17 p.m., exactly 47 minutes after our anniversary dinner reservation that Scott had canceled. 4 hours after he'd texted that an emergency client meeting would keep him at the office until midnight. 11 minutes since I'd watched my husband of 10 years walk up to a stranger's downtown condo with blue hydrangeas and vintage champagne that should have been mine. The weight of the leather portfolio in my hands felt heavier than the decade we'd spent building a life together. Inside were the divorce papers I'd had drawn up 3 weeks ago when I first discovered the truth. I hadn't planned on delivering them tonight, but then again, Scott hadn't planned on me following him either. Rain tapped gently against the windshield, blurring the warm glow of the condo's lobby entrance where Scott had disappeared moments ago. I'd parked in a loading zone across the street, close enough to see everything but far enough that he wouldn't notice my car even if he happened to look. Not that he was looking for me. As far as Scott knew, I was home making myself a sad microwave dinner and believing his lies. Again. They say defining moments in life come when you least expect them. Mine came on our 10th anniversary, sitting in a parked car in the rain, watching the carefully constructed facade of my marriage crumble before my eyes. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind for 21 days. Practiced what I would say when I finally confronted Scott about his affair. Imagined the shock, the denial, the inevitable confession. But sitting there, rain dancing on the roof of my car, I realized no amount of preparation could steady my racing heart. I had spent 2 hours getting ready for a dinner that would never happen. Choosing a dark green dress that Scott had once said made my eyes look like emeralds. Applied makeup. With the precision of someone who still believed in perfect evenings and honest promises. Now I sat outside another woman's building, witnessing the death of those beliefs in real time. I've always wondered what true shock looks like on a person's face. That split second when the mind can't process what the eyes are seeing. In about 10 minutes I was going to find out. I never thought I'd be this woman. The one following her husband, gathering evidence, consulting lawyers. The one sitting in a car in the rain about to shatter the comfortable lives we'd both been living. This wasn't the life I had planned. At 36, I had checked all the boxes life had offered. Senior marketing director at a Fortune 500 company by 32. Dream brownstone in the historic district by 34. Marriage to my college sweetheart that all our friends envied. I built successful campaigns for major brands while methodically constructing my own. Our home was a showcase, the kind that makes it into Architectural Digest. Restored crown molding, original hardwood floors, carefully curated art. Scott called it my masterpiece. What visitors couldn't see were the invisible walls we'd built between us. Room by room, year by year. As I sat in my car, I thought about all the stories we tell ourselves to avoid facing painful truths. How Scott was just working hard for our future. How his distance was stress, not disinterest. How the late nights and weekend emergencies were dedication to his career, not to someone else. For months, I had been the woman waiting at home. The one making excuses to friends about his absences. The one lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering where he really was. Tonight, I was done waiting. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror. My mascara remained perfect despite the humidity. My hair, styled in loose waves, still held its shape. I looked put together, composed, the opposite of how I felt inside. But appearances had always mattered in my marriage to Scott. Tonight would be no different. I grabbed my leather portfolio, opened my car door, and stepped into the light rain. The click of my heels on the wet pavement echoed between the buildings as I crossed the street. I straightened my posture, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the entrance with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The lobby was modern and minimalist, all glass, steel, and polished concrete. A security guard sat behind a sleek desk, scrolling through his phone. "I'm here to see Melissa Winters in 701, I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue. The woman who had been a faceless threat for weeks now had a name, an address, and in moments, a face. The guard barely looked up. "Go ahead," he said, waving me toward the elevator. I had learned Melissa's name and address from her Instagram profile after I found her earring in Scott's car, a distinctive rose gold piece with her initials engraved on the back. Not exactly subtle. When I'd asked Scott about it, he'd claimed it belonged to his new client, a jewelry designer. It was a sample she'd given him to show me, a potential anniversary gift. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost believed him, until I found her Instagram that night. Melissa Winters, 29, jewelry designer with a studio in Soho and a condo downtown. Her latest post, a selfie wearing the matching earring with the caption, "Designs with meaning for those who appreciate the value of uniqueness." Jewelry designer, custom piece, initials. What caught my eye wasn't the earring, but the location tag. A restaurant Scott had claimed to be meeting potential clients at just 2 nights before. In the background of her selfie, barely visible but unmistakable, Scott's watch-clad wrist and the sleeve of his favorite navy blazer. The elevator rose silently to the 7th floor. My stomach tightened with each illuminated number. 5, 6, 7. The doors opened onto a hallway with muted gray carpet and soft lighting. Only 4 doors on this floor. 701 would be at the end, facing the city skyline if the building's exterior was any indication. I walked slowly, each step deliberate. The portfolio felt like it weighed 50 pounds now. Inside were not just divorce papers but printouts of text messages Scott thought were deleted. Credit card statements showing hotel charges in the city on nights he was supposedly out of town. Screenshots from Melissa's Instagram with Scott partially visible in multiple posts over the last 8 months. 8 months. While I was organizing our anniversary trip to Italy, the one Scott had postponed twice due to work commitments, he was building a relationship with another woman. A woman who was now receiving the flowers and champagne I should have been enjoying over candlelight at Marcello's, where he had proposed a decade ago. I reached her door. 701. A sleek, modern number plaque adorned the wall beside it. I could hear music inside, something soft and jazz-like. The murmur of voices, the clink of glasses. I stood there for what felt like eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, gathering my courage, steadying my breathing. Then I raised my hand and pressed the doorbell. The music lowered. Footsteps approached. I gripped the portfolio tighter. The door swung open, and there stood Scott, his tie loosened, top button undone, the way he used to look coming home to me. His eyes went from warm anticipation to cold fear in the span of a heartbeat. "Olivia? How did you—" I remained composed, extending the portfolio toward him. "Happy anniversary, Scott." A woman appeared behind him, tall, slender, with dark hair cascading past her shoulders. She was beautiful, younger, the kind of woman who probably didn't have to schedule intimacy on a shared Google Calendar. She looked at me with confusion, then at Scott with growing understanding. "Scott? Who is this?" she asked, her hand coming to rest possessively on his arm. "I'm his wife," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Or at least I am for now. I held out the portfolio. I thought, I'd save you a trip to the lawyer's office. Everything's there. Signed, notarized, ready for your signature. Scott stared at the portfolio but didn't take it. Olivia, please, this isn't... I can explain. There's nothing to explain. Not anymore, I said with calm dignity. I placed the portfolio in his hands, then turned to the woman, Melissa, who stood frozen in place. He likes his coffee with 1 sugar and a splash of cream. He'll tell you he's fine sleeping on either side of the bed, but he always gravitates to the right. And he apparently makes the same promises to multiple women, so I'd consider that carefully. I turned back to Scott, who stood speechless, the portfolio hanging limply from his hands. 10 years, Scott. 10 years of building a life while you were building lies. I deserve better. We both know that. Rain continued to fall as I turned to leave, holding my posture straight, dignified even in betrayal. As I walked toward the elevator, I felt the weight of those 10 years lifting with each step, the rain outside washing away the woman who made excuses, who waited up, who believed the lies. I didn't look back. Not at the condo, not at Scott, not at the life I was leaving behind. They say the truth will set you free. What they don't tell you is that freedom comes with its own kind of pain and power. I had never felt more of both than I did in that moment, riding the elevator down to the lobby, walking through the glass doors into the rain-soaked night, and driving away from the man who had broken my heart and the woman who had unwittingly helped me find my strength. As I drove through the glistening streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement, I felt something unexpected beneath the hurt and anger. Relief. The weight of suspicion and doubt that had been my constant companion for months was gone, replaced by the clear certainty of knowing exactly where I stood and where I was headed. Forward without Scott, into a future entirely my own. The rain had stopped by the time I pulled into the driveway of what had been our home. Moonlight broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the facade of the brownstone we had lovingly restored together. Or so I had thought. In that moment, I realized how much of the work, both on the house and in our marriage, had been mine alone. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the dark windows, the brass knocker on the door that I had spent a weekend restoring by hand, the window boxes filled with the herbs I tended each morning. This house had been my dream, my labor of love. And yet, sitting there, I knew with sudden clarity that I could walk away from it all, because houses can be rebuilt, restored, reimagined. But a broken foundation can never truly be fixed. I picked up my phone and texted my best friend, Rebecca. "It's done. Can I stay with you tonight?" Her response came immediately. "Doors open, wine's breathing, spare room ready, proud of you." I smiled, my first genuine smile in months, and started the car again. Sometimes endings are just beginnings in disguise. And tonight, driving away from 10 years of marriage toward a friend who had seen my worth even when I couldn't, felt like the beginning of something true. Rebecca's spare bedroom became my sanctuary that night. I sat cross-legged on the unfamiliar bed, still wearing my anniversary dress, staring at the phone I'd silenced after leaving Scott at Melissa's doorstep. The screen periodically illuminated with his calls and messages, 17 missed calls, and 29 texts in the 2 hours since our confrontation. I didn't read them. Not yet. I needed this moment of suspended animation, this quiet space between what was and what would be, to simply breathe. The clock on Rebecca's nightstand read 11:34 p.m. By now, Scott would have returned to our brownstone, finding it empty, wondering where I'd gone. Would he be worried? Angry? Relieved that I'd spared him the awkward conversation he'd been planning to have in a few weeks, according to the text messages I'd discovered? Do you need anything else? Rebecca asked, leaning against the doorframe. She'd welcomed me with open arms, asked no questions beyond, "Are you okay?" and simply handed me a glass of Cabernet and the space to process. "I'm good," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. Not happy, certainly not whole, but good in the sense that I was exactly where I needed to be, doing exactly what I needed to do. "He's still calling," Rebecca observed, nodding toward my phone as it lit up again. "Let him," I replied, taking a sip of wine. 10 years didn't matter to him. A few hours of uncertainty won't kill him. Rebecca smiled, a mixture of pride and concern in her expression. "This isn't how I pictured us spending your anniversary." "Me neither," I admitted. "I'd prepared a whole speech for tonight, you know. After dinner at Marcello's, I was going to tell him I knew everything. Give him a chance to explain. To fight for us." I laughed softly, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Funny how plans change when you watch your husband walk into another woman's apartment with your anniversary flowers. Rebecca crossed the room and sat beside me on the bed. "When did you know for sure? About the affair?" I closed my eyes, letting the question settle around me. When did I know? Not suspected, not feared, but known with the bone-deep certainty that changes everything. 3 weeks ago, I said, opening my eyes. But I think part of me knew months. Before that, there were so many signs. The late nights at the office that started last fall, the sudden business trips to cities where his firm didn't have clients, the way he'd stop mid-conversation when I entered a room, his phone quickly locked and set aside. The new cologne he claimed was part of the company's rebranding effort, the decreased interest in our traditional Sunday brunches. The password on his phone changed from my birthday to something I didn't know. 1,000 paper cuts of suspicion, none conclusive on its own, but devastating in their totality. "I should have seen it sooner," I said, more to myself than to Rebecca. "Don't do that to yourself," she replied firmly. "This is on him, not you." I nodded, though the sense of failure lingered. I was a marketing director who built campaigns around understanding human behavior, predicting consumer patterns, spotting trends before they emerged. How had I missed the signs in my own marriage? "What will you do now?" Rebecca asked, her question pulling me back to the present crisis. What would I do? The portfolio I'd handed Scott contained more than just divorce papers. It held the roadmap for our separation, equal division of assets, sale of the brownstone with proceeds split evenly, each of us keeping our own retirement, accounts, clean, fair, decisive. The framework was there, waiting only for his signature to set it in motion, but frameworks were just the beginning. They didn't account for the reality of dismantling a decade of shared life. The friends who would feel forced to choose sides, the questions from colleagues who had witnessed our supposedly perfect partnership, the calls to the family who still displayed our wedding photos on mantels and side tables. "I'm going to breathe," I said finally. "Just breathe and take it one day at a time." Rebecca squeezed my hand. "You can stay here as long as you need." "Just tonight," I replied. "Tomorrow I'll face whatever comes next." After Rebecca left, I changed out of my dress into the t-shirt and sweatpants she'd lent me. I washed my face, removing all traces of the carefully applied makeup, and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Who was this woman looking? Back at me? Not the polished marketing executive with the perfect life. Not the betrayed wife fighting back tears. Someone new was emerging from the wreckage of this day. Someone I didn't fully recognize yet. Someone whose eyes held both pain and determination in equal measure. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt fully present in my own skin. The constant background anxiety that had been my companion for months, the nagging feeling that something was wrong, the mental energy spent analyzing Scott's every word and action for hidden meanings, was gone. In its place was a strange clarity, as if I'd been viewing my life through a smudged lens that had suddenly been wiped clean. I returned to the bedroom and picked up my phone, finally ready to face Scott's messages. They followed a predictable pattern. 49 p.m. Olivia, please call me. 8:55 p.m. This isn't what you think. 9:07 p.m. Where are you? Are you okay? 9:16 p.m. Please come home so we can talk about this. 9:34 p.m. I'm sorry, please let me explain. 9:48 p.m. I'm coming home. We need to talk. 10:03 p.m. Where are you? I'm worried. 10:15 p.m. I know you're upset, but disappearing isn't the answer. 10:27 p.m. At least tell me you're safe. 10:46 p.m. This isn't fair, Olivia. You show up out of nowhere, throw divorce papers at me, and then vanish? 11:02 p.m. I deserve a chance to explain my side. 11:18 p.m. You're being childish. Come home so we can discuss this like adults. 11:32 p.m. Fine, stay wherever you are. But this isn't over. The final text had come in just minutes ago. I love you. I've made terrible mistakes, but I love you. Please come home. Anger, guilt, concern, defensiveness, and finally, when none of those worked, proclamations of love. The full spectrum of emotional manipulation condensed into 19 text messages. I typed a single response. I'm safe. I'll contact you tomorrow to arrange a time to talk. Then I silenced my phone again and set it aside. Sleep came surprisingly easily that night. Not the fitful, anxious sleep that had plagued me for months, but the deep rest of someone who has finally set down a heavy burden they didn't realize they were carrying. Morning arrived with soft light filtering through unfamiliar curtains and the smell of coffee wafting from Rebecca's kitchen. For a moment, in that hazy space between sleep and wakefulness, I forgot everything that had happened. Then reality rushed back, not as a crushing weight, but as a simple fact. My marriage was over, and today was the first day of whatever came next. I found Rebecca in her kitchen, already dressed for her job as a pediatric surgeon, pouring coffee into a travel mug. There's a fresh pot, she said, nodding toward the coffee maker. I've got an early surgery, but I can cancel if you need me to stay. Go save lives, I told her, reaching for a mug from the cabinet. I'll be fine. What's your plan for today? I poured coffee and added a splash of cream. I need to go home. Pack some essentials. Figure out where I'm staying long term. You know you can... Stay here, I know. I finished for her. And I appreciate it more than I can say. But I need my own space to figure this out. Rebecca nodded, understanding. Call me if you need anything. Absolutely anything. After she left, I sat at her kitchen island, planning my next steps. I'd need clothes, toiletries, and important documents, my laptop and work materials, the family, photo albums I'd painstakingly assembled each year of our marriage, the antique silver frame that had been my grandmother's. I made a list, methodical and practical, the way I approached any project at work, breaking down the intimidating whole into manageable parts. Step 1. Go home and pack. Step 2. Secure temporary housing. Step 3. Contact my lawyer to confirm Scott had received the papers. My phone, which I'd finally unmuted, buzzed with a text from Scott. I called in sick today. I'll be home all day. Please come so we can talk. I stared at the message, considering my options. I could wait until he left for work tomorrow, avoiding a confrontation but delaying the inevitable. I could ask him to leave for a few hours so I could gather my things in peace. Or I could face him directly, on my terms, with the clarity and resolve I'd found last night. The third option was the only one that felt right. I'll be there at 11, I texted back. No other commentary, no emotion. Just a time. His response came immediately. Thank you. I showered and dressed in the clothes I'd worn the night before. my anniversary outfit now feeling like a costume from a play I'd no longer be performing in. Rebecca, thoughtful as always, had left a new toothbrush and travel-sized toiletries on the bathroom counter. At 10:45, I called a rideshare to take me back to the brownstone. As the car wound through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were seeing everything for the first time, or perhaps the last. The magnolias Mrs. Peterson had planted 30 years ago, now towering over, her Victorian. The corner market where Scott and I used to buy fresh bread on Sunday mornings. The park where we'd walked countless times, planning our future in animated conversations that now seemed like scenes from someone else's life. We turned onto our street, and there it was, the 3-story brownstone with the midnight blue door and brass knocker. Scott's car was in the driveway, confirming he was home, waiting. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, gathering myself. 10 years of memories existed within those walls. First night champagne on the floor before the furniture arrived. Arguments over paint colors and restoration choices. Holiday parties that friends still talked about years later. Lazy Sunday afternoons reading in the window seat I'd insisted on building into the library renovation. And more recently, the quiet dinners spent on opposite sides of the table, both of us on our phones. The stilted conversations that never went. Deeper than scheduling and household matters. The nights I'd lain awake beside him, wondering when and how we'd drifted so far apart. I walked up the steps and hesitated at the door. Should I knock? Use my key? This liminal space between married and separated came with no etiquette guidelines, no clear protocols. In the end, I used my key, pushing open the door to what had been my home for 6 years. The entryway was exactly as I'd left it yesterday, mail neatly stacked on the console table, keys in the ceramic dish I'd bought during our trip to Santa Fe, fresh flowers, not blue hydrangeas, in the tall vase by the stairs. Everything precisely in its place, just as I'd always kept it. Olivia? Scott's voice came from the kitchen, followed by the sound of a chair pushing back, footsteps approaching. He appeared in the hallway, and the sight of him hit me harder than I'd expected. He looked terrible. Unshaven, hair disheveled, still, wearing the dress shirt from yesterday, though it was now wrinkled beyond recognition. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of a sleepless night. Good, a vindictive part of me thought. Let him lose sleep for once. You came, he said, as if he'd half expected me to change my mind. I said I would. I remained in the entryway, making no move to come further into the house. This was a tactical decision. Staying near the door gave me both physical and psychological advantage. An easy exit if needed, and a clear signal that I wasn't settling. In for a long, emotional conversation. Scott seemed to register this, his eyes darting to the space between us, then back to my face. Can we sit down at least? Talk properly? I'm fine standing, I said. What do you want to say, Scott? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing, but now recognized as one of his stalling tactics. What you saw last night, it's not what you think. Really? I raised an eyebrow. Because what I think is that my husband canceled our anniversary dinner with a fake work emergency so he could celebrate with another woman. What part of that did I misinterpret? It's complicated, he said. Actually, it's remarkably simple, I countered. You're having an affair with Melissa Winters. Have been for at least 8 months, based on your hotel charges and her Instagram posts. You've been lying to me about late nights and business trips so you could be with her. You were planning to ask for a separation in a few weeks after you'd secured a lawyer who could help you keep the house in the divorce. Did I miss anything? The color drained from his face. How did you know all that? I finished for him. Because unlike you, I'm good at my job. When things don't add up, I investigate. I found the answers. Scott took a step toward me, then seemed to think better of it when he saw me tense. Olivia, please. I made a terrible mistake. But 10 years of marriage has to count for something. We can work through this. Go to counseling. Start over. Why would we? I asked, genuinely curious. Be honest, Scott. Not with me, with yourself. Were you happy? Before Melissa, were you happy in this marriage? He opened his mouth, closed it again. The hesitation was answered enough. Neither was I admitted. I just didn't let myself see it. We've been going through the motions for years, building a picture-perfect life that looks great from the outside but feels hollow on the inside. That's not true, he protested, but there was no conviction in his voice. It is, I said gently. And maybe that's on both of us. We got so caught up in creating the perfect home, the perfect careers, the perfect image, that we forgot to create an actual marriage underneath it all. Scott leaned against the wall, suddenly looking every bit his 38 years. So that's it? One mistake and we throw away a decade together? It wasn't one mistake, Scott. There were hundreds of choices. Every time you chose to lie about where you were, every time you messaged her instead of talking to me, every hotel room, every dinner, every gift you gave her instead of investing in us. I paused, letting the words sink in. And it wasn't just you making those choices. I chose to ignore the signs, to make excuses for your behavior, to prioritize our image over our reality. A heavy silence fell between us, filled with the weight of everything we'd built and everything we'd neglected. I didn't come here to argue, I said finally. I came to get some of my things. I'll be staying elsewhere for now. Where? He asked. That's not your concern anymore. His jaw tightened. And the divorce papers? You're really going through with this? Yes, I said simply. I deserve better than a husband who cheats. You deserve more than a wife you have to lie to. We both deserve a chance at genuine happiness, even if it's not with each other. Something shifted in his expression then. Reluctant acknowledgement, perhaps, or the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in months. I need about an hour, I continued. You can stay or go, that's your choice. But I'm taking what I came for, and then I'm leaving. Scott nodded slowly. I'll be in my office. Take whatever you need. He turned and walked down the hallway, shoulders slumped in defeat or relief, I couldn't tell which, and I realized it no longer mattered to me. I stood in the entryway a moment longer, looking at the home we'd created, feeling both the weight of what was ending and the curious lightness of possibilities just beginning to form on the horizon. Then I climbed the stairs to what had been our bedroom, ready to pack up the essentials for my new life, starting with the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming. 12 years earlier, I sat in the back row of Professor Wilson's marketing strategy seminar, frantically highlighting passages in my textbook before class began. Northwestern's MBA program was everything I'd hoped for: challenging, competitive, and the perfect launching pad for the career I'd meticulously planned since undergrad. Is this seat taken? I looked up to find a pair of hazel eyes looking down at me. Tall, with dark hair and a coffee cup in one hand, a backpack slung over his shoulder. It's all yours, I replied, moving my bag from the adjacent chair. Thanks. I'm Scott, by the way. Scott Daniels. He extended his hand. Olivia Mitchell. His handshake was firm, confident. Mitchell. Wait, aren't you the one who questioned Professor Wilson's case study analysis last week? Something about overlooking cultural factors in the European market expansion? I blinked, surprised he'd remembered. That was me. That was brilliant, he said, settling into the chair beside me. Wilson looked like he wanted to either fail you or offer you a job on the spot, I laughed. Probably the former. I don't think he's used to being challenged. Well, he better get used to it. Scott's smile was warm, genuine. Your analysis was spot on. Before I could respond, Professor Wilson strode in, immediately launching into a lecture on competitive positioning. But throughout the class, I found myself acutely aware of Scott beside me. the way he leaned forward when something interested him, his thoughtful nods, the occasional note he jotted in precise handwriting. When Wilson finally dismissed us, Scott turned to me again. "Some of us are grabbing coffee to discuss the group project. Want to join?" That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into studying together at the library until closing. Studying turned into late-night conversations about everything from childhood dreams to future ambitions. Scott was smart, driven, and surprisingly easy to talk to, qualities I hadn't expected to find in the same package. "I want to revolutionize how financial services are marketed to millennials," he told me one night, as we walked across campus after a study session. "Everyone's so focused on traditional approaches, but our generation needs something different." "What are you thinking?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Transparency. Authenticity. None of that corporate jargon that makes people's eyes glaze over. Financial products marketed through human stories, not statistics." I smiled. "Sounds like you've found your niche. What about you? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" "Creative director at a top agency," I replied without hesitation. "I want to build campaigns that change how people see brands, make them part of cultural conversations, not just commercial breaks." Scott stopped walking and looked at me with unexpected intensity. "You're going to be incredible, Olivia Mitchell. I hope I'm around to see it." 3 weeks later, he kissed me for the first time, in the business school library of all places, surrounded by marketing textbooks and financial journals. It wasn't planned or perfect, just a spontaneous moment after I'd helped him crack a particularly challenging case study. "Sorry," he said afterward, looking anything but. "I've been wanting to do that since marketing strategy." I smiled, trying to ignore the butterflies in my stomach. "I'm not complaining." Our relationship evolved with the same focused intensity that characterized our academic pursuits. We were good together, challenging each other intellectually, supporting each other's ambitions, finding balance in our complementary strengths. Scott was big picture and bold, where I was detail-oriented and methodical. I helped him refine his ideas. He pushed me to think beyond conventional approaches. By graduation, we were the power couple of our MBA cohort. Scott had already secured a position at Hamilton Financial, a prestigious firm with a growing focus on digital innovation. I had 3 offers from top agencies, but chose Crawford & Burke in Chicago for their creative reputation and impressive client roster. "Look at us," Scott said on graduation night, as we shared a bottle of champagne on the rooftop of his apartment building. The Chicago skyline glittered around us, full of promise. 2 years ago, we were strangers. Now we're taking on the world. Together. "Planning to conquer it?" I teased. He kissed me, tasting champagne and possibility. "With you? Absolutely." The first years of our relationship were a whirlwind of career advancement and shared achievements. We moved in together 6 months after graduation, finding a modern apartment in Lincoln Park with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the lake. Our life took on a pleasant rhythm, challenging work weeks followed by weekend explorations of Chicago's neighborhoods, museums, and restaurants. Scott rose quickly at Hamilton Financial, his innovative approaches to digital banking earning him recognition from senior leadership. I was building my own reputation at Crawford & Burke, my campaigns for a national retail chain gaining industry attention, and my first advertising award. "We should celebrate," Scott said when I called to tell him about the award. "Dinner at Everest?" That night, over exquisite French cuisine and panoramic views of the city, Scott reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm so proud of you, Liv. You're everything I knew you would be." "We're both doing exactly what we set out to do," I replied, squeezing his hand. "It's all happening according to plan." Scott's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Speaking of plans, I've been thinking about ours." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "This wasn't how I planned to do this," I had something more elaborate in mind. But sitting here with you, celebrating your success, I can't think of a more perfect moment. He opened the box to reveal a platinum ring with a princess-cut diamond. Elegant, modern, exactly. My taste. Olivia Mitchell, you're the most brilliant, driven, amazing woman I've ever known. Will you marry me? Despite having discussed marriage theoretically, the actual moment caught me by surprise. But my answer came without hesitation. Yes. The next day, we called our families with the news. My parents, both professors at the University of Virginia, were cautiously supportive. Happy for me, but concerned about the relatively short time we'd been together. Scott's family, particularly his mother, was over the moon. When's the wedding? Scott's mother asked immediately. Spring? Summer? You know the club books up a year in advance for the good dates. Scott laughed, putting the call on speaker so I could hear. Mom, we just got engaged yesterday. Give us a minute to enjoy it before we start planning. But planning was what we did best. Within a week, we had a spreadsheet for the wedding. Potential venues, guest list categories, budget projections. We approached it like any other project. Methodically, efficiently, with clear goals and timelines. Fall wedding? Scott suggested as we reviewed our spreadsheet one evening. The colors would be beautiful for photos. September, I agreed. Not too hot, not too cold. 14 months from now, he calculated. Perfect timing. Hamilton's major system launch will be complete by then, and you'll be finished with the Meridian campaign. I smiled, adding September 24th to our planning document. Look at us scheduling our wedding around work projects. Power couple problems, Scott teased, kissing my temple. But that's why we work. He was right. Our shared ambition, our parallel. Career tracks, our mutual understanding of the demands of professional advancement. These were the foundations of our relationship. We respected each other's work because we understood it, supported each other's goals because they mirrored our own. The 14 months of our engagement passed in a blur of wedding planning, career milestones, and dreams for the future. We bought our first piece of real estate together, a modern condo in River North, closer to both our offices. We opened joint investment accounts, created 5-year financial plans, and discussed future career moves. Everything was calculated, considered, part of the grand design we were creating together. Our wedding was exactly what we'd planned. Sophisticated, elegant, meticulously executed. The historic Chicago club Scott's family belonged to provided a stunning backdrop of old-world charm combined with city views. I wore a sleek architectural gown that fashion-forward guests still mention years later. Scott looked impossibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, his face lighting up when he saw me at the end of the aisle. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, he said during his vows, his voice steady and sure. You're my partner in every sense of the word, the one who challenges me to be better, who sees the world with such clarity and purpose. I promise to support your dreams as fervently as my own, to build a life with you that exceeds even our ambitious plans, to love you through achievements and setbacks alike. My own vows echoed his sentiment. Scott, you've been my greatest advocate, my most honest critic, my perfect counterbalance. I promise to stand beside you as we build our future, to celebrate your victories as my own, to face whatever challenges come our way as a united team. I choose you today and every day to come. As we exchanged rings under an archway of autumn blooms, I felt a profound sense of rightness. We had found in each other the perfect partner, someone who understood ambition, wasn't just acceptable but essential, who saw marriage as a strategic alliance as much as a romantic union. To Scott and Olivia, my father toasted at the reception, two brilliant minds who found each other. May your marriage be as thoughtfully constructed as your careers. The honeymoon was a carefully plotted 2 weeks in Japan, Tokyo for its innovation and energy, Kyoto for its tradition and tranquility. We visited design studios and marketing firms alongside ancient temples and gardens. Scott arranged meetings with financial technology innovators. I connected with creative directors at Japanese advertising agencies. Even our honeymoon was a blend of pleasure and professional development, exactly as we both wanted it. "We're not like other couples," Scott observed one evening as we sat in a minimalist hotel bar overlooking Tokyo's neon landscape. "Most newlyweds wouldn't be scheduling business meetings on their honeymoon." "Most newlyweds don't understand each other's ambitions the way we do," I replied, clinking my sake cup against his. "To unconventional perfection," he toasted. The early years of our marriage continued in the same vein as our dating life. Dual careers advancing in parallel, mutual support through professional challenges, shared satisfaction in each other's achievements. We were partners in the truest sense, operating as a unit both personally and professionally. When Scott was offered a significant promotion 3 years into our marriage, one that would require longer hours and occasional travel, we discussed it as a joint decision. "This is everything you've been working toward," I told him over dinner in our condo. "Of course you should take it. But the hours will be brutal for at least the first year," he cautioned. "And I know you've got the Westfield campaign launching." I waved away his concern. "We'll make it work. We always do." And we did, for a while. We mastered the art of quality over quantity, making the most of our limited time together, staying connected through texts and calls when apart, scheduling date nights with the same precision we scheduled client meetings. Our 5th anniversary arrived during this intense period. Scott, despite being in the middle of a major client acquisition, arranged a surprise trip to San Francisco, combining it with a conference he needed to attend, but extending the stay to include a weekend at a boutique hotel in Napa. 5 amazing years, he toasted over dinner at a renowned vineyard restaurant, and to many more of building our empire together. I smiled across the candle-lit table at my husband, successful, ambitious, still as handsome as the day we met in that marketing seminar. Our very own empire. I like the sound of that. It was around our 6th anniversary that we began discussing a more permanent home. The condo had served us well, but with both our careers solidly established and our financial positions stronger than ever, we were ready for something more significant. "What about a brownstone?" Scott suggested one Sunday as we browsed real estate listings. "One of those historic ones in Logan Square? We could restore it. Make it exactly what we want." The idea captured my imagination immediately. A project we could really put our stamp on. The search took 6 months. We viewed dozens of properties, weighing locations against renovation potential, historical features against modern needs. When we finally found it, a 3-story brownstone with original hardwood floors, crown molding, and enough architectural character to merit its hefty price tag, we knew immediately it was the one. "This is where we'll build the next chapter," Scott said as we stood in the empty living room after closing, champagne glasses in hand. "To new beginnings," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the unfurnished space. The renovation became our shared passion, the first non-career project we'd undertaken together. I threw myself into researching period-appropriate restorations, finding craftspeople who specialized in historical renovations, selecting fixtures and finishes that honored the home's character while adding modern functionality. Scott focused on the structural elements, updating electrical systems, reinforcing foundations, installing state-of-the-art security. Together, we created detailed plans for each room, debating paint colors and furniture placement with the same intensity we'd once debated marketing strategies. "We make a good team," Scott observed one evening as we reviewed samples for the kitchen. Backsplash. Different strengths, same vision. I leaned against his shoulder, suddenly overwhelmed with affection for this man who'd been my partner in everything for almost a decade. "We always have." The brownstone renovation took 14 months, longer than expected due to permit delays and the discovery of structural issues hidden behind century-old walls. But when it was finally complete, the result exceeded even our exacting standards. Architectural Digest featured it in their Historic Homes Reimagined issue, the photographer capturing the perfect balance we'd achieved between preservation and innovation. "You've created something extraordinary here," the journalist told us during the interview. "It's clear this home is a labor of love." Scott squeezed my hand as we posed for photos in front of the restored fireplace. "Everything we do together is." That line made it into the article, accompanied by a photo of us looking polished and perfect in our meticulously restored home. The very image of successful modern partnership. What the photo couldn't capture was how rarely we were both home to enjoy the spaces we'd so carefully created, how our schedules had grown increasingly separate, how conversations that once flowed effortlessly now seemed to require more effort, more intentionality. But success requires sacrifice. This was something we both understood, had always understood. And from the outside looking in, we were the embodiment of success, thriving careers, beautiful home, strong marriage, the perfect power couple, just as we'd planned to be. If there were moments when I wondered whether we'd built a showcase rather than a home, or whether our connection had become more professional than personal, I dismissed them as temporary concerns, products of our busy seasons. After all, we had everything we'd ever wanted. Everything we'd worked for. Everything we'd planned, didn't we? Our 8th anniversary fell during the final phase of the brownstone renovation. We celebrated with takeout and expensive wine, sitting on drop cloths in what would soon become our formal dining room. Not quite the glamorous celebration I had planned, Scott said, refilling my glass with a Cabernet that cost more than our dinner. "I don't know," I replied, looking around at the partially completed wainscoting and the chandelier we'd found at an architectural salvage shop. "I kind of love it. It's so us, building something together." Scott raised his glass. "To work in progress. Both the house and us," I added with a smile. He met my eyes over the rim of his glass. "You know what I realized today? When this renovation is complete, we'll have created something that could outlast us by a century. Future families will live in the spaces we designed." The thought was both profound and slightly melancholy. "Our legacy? One of them," Scott agreed. "Hopefully not the only one." The question of children had hovered at the edges of our marriage for years, acknowledged occasionally but never directly addressed. We'd always positioned it as someday, a future consideration once our careers were established. The house was complete. The timing was right. "Do you think about it more these days?" I asked carefully. "Starting a family?" Scott set down his wine glass, considering. "I do, actually. Now that the Hamilton restructuring is complete and my team is solid, I could theoretically adjust my schedule if needed." He looked around at our half-finished dining room. "And once we're actually living here instead of camping in our own house, we'll have the space." My heart quickened unexpectedly. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying maybe someday is approaching," he replied with a tentative smile. "What do you think?" It wasn't a conversation I'd anticipated having while sitting on drop cloths surrounded by paint samples, but somehow the setting felt appropriate. Discussing one construction project while in the midst of another. I'm not opposed to moving someday onto the actual calendar," I said carefully. "The Westbrook campaign launches in 4 months. After that, my schedule eases a bit. We could revisit the conversation then?" Scott leaned over to kiss me, tasting of wine and possibility. It's a date. 3 months later, we finally moved into our completed brownstone. The moment had an almost ceremonial quality, crossing the threshold with the last boxes from our condo, closing the door on our transitional home, and fully embracing this new chapter. "Welcome home, Mrs. Daniels," Scott said, dropping the boxes in the entryway and pulling me into his arms. "It doesn't feel quite real," I admitted, looking around at the spaces we'd spent over a year planning, designing, and renovating. Each room represented countless decisions, compromises, and shared visions. "Oh, it's real," Scott assured me. "And it's ours." That first night in our new home, we christened it in the most traditional way, making love in our new bedroom, with moonlight filtering through the restored stained glass window we'd discovered hidden behind plywood during the renovation. Afterward, lying in Scott's arms, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't expected, as if we'd reached the summit we'd been climbing toward since those first days at Northwestern. "Happy?" Scott murmured against my hair. "Perfect," I replied. The following weeks took on a different rhythm than our previous life. For the first time in our relationship, our home became as much a focus as our careers. We established new traditions: Sunday brunches in our gourmet kitchen, evening walks through the historic neighborhood, dinner parties showcasing both the house and Scott's surprising culinary skills. "Who knew you could cook like this?" Rebecca marveled at our first dinner party as Scott served a perfectly prepared rack of lamb. "Hidden talents," he replied with a wink in my direction. "Olivia's been bringing them out in me for years." It was a golden period in our marriage, a time when our professional success was matched by personal contentment, when the foundation we'd built over nearly a decade seemed solid and secure. The brownstone became our sanctuary, reflecting both our individual tastes and our shared aesthetic. The library with its built-in bookshelves and window seat catered to my love of quiet reading spaces. The home office with its custom standing desk and integrated technology reflected Scott's workflow preferences. The garden, though small by suburban standards, became my weekend project, a creative outlet separate from my advertising work. True to our agreement, 4 months after moving in, we revisited the conversation about starting a family. Over dinner, in our now completed dining room, we discussed logistics, timing, and adjustments we'd both need to make. "Crawford and Burke has decent parental leave," I explained, having researched the policy thoroughly. 6 months at partial pay, with the option for another 6 unpaid. And they've been more open to flexible scheduling since the pandemic. Scott nodded, making mental notes as he always did when processing information. "Hamilton's policy isn't as progressive, but I've built enough political capital to negotiate something workable. Johnson took 4 months when his twins were born last year, and the world didn't end." We approached the possibility of parenthood the same way we approached everything: methodically, pragmatically, with careful consideration of all variables. Some might have found our planning clinical, but for us, it was an expression of commitment, of taking seriously the potential responsibility of bringing a new life into the world. "So we're really doing this?" I asked, a mixture of excitement and nervousness fluttering in my chest. Scott reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "If you're ready, I'm ready." That night, I removed the birth control pills I'd taken faithfully for years from my nightstand drawer and placed them in the bathroom trash. A small gesture with enormous implications. "No going back now," Scott said lightly as he watched from the doorway. I turned to him, suddenly serious. "Are you sure about this? Really sure? Because if you have any doubts..." He crossed the room and took my face in his hands. "Olivia, I've never been more sure of anything. You and me, building this next chapter, together? It's everything I want." For the next 6 months, our lives took on yet another dimension as we tried to conceive. What started as exciting and spontaneous gradually became more calculated as months passed without success. Basal thermometers, ovulation tracking apps, and scheduled intimacy replaced romantic spontaneity. "This isn't exactly how I imagined it would be," I admitted one night, after another perfectly timed but somehow mechanical encounter. Scott sighed, staring up at the ceiling. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't apologize," I said quickly. "It's not your fault. It's just..." When did having a baby become another project to manage? Another goal to optimize for? He turned toward me, concerned about etching his features. Do you want to take a break? Put this on hold for a while? I considered it. Part of me wanted to say yes, to return to the natural rhythm of our relationship, to stop measuring success by ovulation sticks and pregnancy tests. But another part feared losing momentum, wasting precious time when my biological clock was undeniably ticking. No, I decided. But maybe we can try to, I don't know, bring some joy back into the process? Remember why we're doing this in the first place? Scott smiled, pulling me closer. I'm open to suggestions. We tried, booking weekend getaways during my fertile window, focusing on connection rather than conception, reminding ourselves that this journey was about creating a family, not just checking another box on our life plan. For a while, it helped. The pressure eased, and we found moments of genuine intimacy amid the scheduled attempts. But as month 12 approached with still no pregnancy, the specter of potential fertility issues loomed larger. Medical consultations became part of our routine. Blood tests, ultrasounds, analyses of various factors that might be hindering conception. All your results look normal, Dr. Patel told me during one appointment, Scott's hand steady in mine. Nothing concerning your hormone levels or ovarian reserve. And mine? Scott asked, his voice carefully neutral. The doctor consulted her notes. Your initial tests show slightly lower motility than ideal, but nothing that should prevent conception entirely. I'd recommend a more comprehensive analysis if you're concerned. We left the appointment with referrals for additional testing and a sense of both relief and lingering uncertainty. Nothing was definitely wrong, but something clearly wasn't working as it should. We'll figure this out, Scott assured me as we walked to the car. Whatever it takes. I squeezed his hand, grateful for his steadiness. I know we will. But the strain was beginning to show in ways neither of us fully acknowledged. Scheduled intimacy had shifted from mechanical to occasionally tense. Periods became moments of quiet disappointment rather than simple biological functions. The question, any news? From well-meaning friends who knew we were trying became increasingly difficult to answer with forced optimism. It was during this challenging period that Crawford and Burke landed the Meridian account, a prestigious cosmetics brand, looking to reposition itself for a younger demographic. As creative director, I was the natural choice to lead the campaign. It's a major opportunity, I told Scott over dinner, the day after the announcement. Career-defining, potentially. That's fantastic, he said, with genuine pride in his voice. No one deserves it more. I hesitated before continuing. There's just one complication, the launch timeline. They're planning to hit the market in September, which means the next 6 months will be intense. Travel to New York at least twice. A month, probably some weekends too. Understanding dawned in Scott's eyes. Right in the middle of our other project. The fertility treatments we'd been discussing. The more intensive protocol Dr. Patel had recommended if we wanted to increase our chances. I could turn it down, I offered, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. In 10 years of marriage, neither of us had ever suggested declining a professional opportunity for personal reasons. Ask them to put Johnson on it instead. Scott was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass. Is that what you want to do? I considered lying, saying yes to preserve the narrative we'd constructed about starting a family. But our relationship had always been built on honesty, particularly about ambition. No, I admitted. I want this campaign. I've been working toward an opportunity like this my entire career. He nodded slowly. Then take it. But what about the baby? Scott finished for me. Maybe this is a sign we should pause that project for a bit. Focus on what's working in our lives rather than what isn't. Relief and guilt flooded me in equal measure. Are you sure? I know how important this is to you. To us, he corrected gently. And yes, it is important. but not at the expense of your career, which I know is as much a part of you as anything else. He reached across the table, taking my hand. We have time, Liv. Your window isn't closing tomorrow. Let's give ourselves permission to put this on hold, just until the Meridian campaign launches. I squeezed his hand, a complicated mixture of emotions swirling within me. I love you. You know that, right? I've never doubted it, he replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The Meridian campaign consumed the next 6 months of my life. 14-hour days, weekend strategy sessions, constant travel between Chicago and New York. Scott was supportive in all the ways I'd come to expect, handling more household responsibilities, joining me in New York when his schedule allowed, celebrating small victories along the way to launch. But something subtle had shifted between us. A quiet distancing I noticed but couldn't seem to address amid the constant demands of the campaign. Our conversations became more logistical than intimate. Our physical connection, no longer governed by fertility tracking but also not rekindled with spontaneity, grew less frequent. We're ships passing in the night these days, Scott observed, one evening as I packed for yet another New York trip. Just until the launch, I promised, kissing him quickly before returning to my suitcase. 2 more months, then things go back to normal. He nodded, but something in his expression, a fleeting shadow I might have imagined, made me pause. We're okay, right? I asked, suddenly unsure. Of course, he replied, the answer coming perhaps too quickly. Just missing my wife. I miss you too, I said, meaning it deeply. Rain check on that conversation we need to have? What happens after Meridian? Absolutely, Scott agreed. When you're not rushing to catch a flight and I'm not on my way to a client's dinner. The conversation was postponed, then postponed again. The Meridian launch approached, bringing with it even greater demands on my time and attention. Scott's own work intensified with a major system implementation, his late nights now matching my own. We existed in parallel, our lives touching but rarely intersecting meaningfully. The beautiful brownstone we'd created together became a shared hotel, a place to sleep, change clothes, occasionally share a quick meal before separating again for work obligations. The Meridian launch was an unqualified success, exceeding projections, generating buzz across social media platforms, earning coverage in major fashion publications. The celebration party in New York was everything a career milestone should be. Congratulations from industry peers, appreciation from the client, recognition of months of intense work. Scott flew in for the event, handsome in his tailored suit, playing the role of supportive husband perfectly. He charmed the Meridian executives, accepted congratulations on my behalf from colleagues who knew us as the industry power couple, posed for photos that would later appear in marketing publications. I'm so proud of you, he said as we returned to our hotel room after the party, his arm around my waist. You've created something extraordinary. We should celebrate properly, I suggested, feeling lighter than I had in months now that the pressure of the launch had lifted. Just us. Maybe that trip to Italy we keep postponing? Something flickered across Scott's expression. Hesitation? Uncertainty? Before he smiled. That sounds perfect. Let's look at dates when we're back in Chicago. But the conversation about Italy, like the conversation about what came next in our family planning, never materialized. We returned to Chicago and fell back into our separate orbits, Scott increasingly consumed by what he described as a major client expansion, me riding the wave of post-Meridian opportunities. Our 9th anniversary arrived amid this ongoing disconnection. We celebrated at Marcello's, a tradition neither of us suggested breaking, but the conversation felt stilted, focused on safe topics like house maintenance and upcoming work travel rather than our relationship or future plans. Remember our first time here? Scott asked as we waited for dessert, a rare reference to our shared history. Of course, I replied, smiling at the memory. You were so nervous I thought you might drop the ring in my champagne by accident. He laughed, the sound warming something that had grown cold between us. I rehearsed that proposal for weeks, had the whole restaurant staff in on it. It was perfect, I assured him, reaching across the table to take his hand. Just like you. For a moment, I glimpsed the Scott I'd fallen in love with. Earnest, present, connected. But then his phone buzzed on the table, and though he didn't check it, something in his expression closed off again. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work," he replied, turning his phone face down. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." We finished dinner with polite conversation and returned home to our beautiful brownstone, where we made love for the first time in weeks. A connection that felt simultaneously familiar and strange, intimate and distant. Afterward, lying beside him in the darkness, I gathered my courage to ask the question that had been hovering between us for months. "Scott? Are we okay?" His breathing changed, just slightly, letting me know he wasn't asleep as I'd half suspected. "Of course we are," he replied after a pause. "Why wouldn't we be?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Something feels different, like we're drifting." He was quiet for so long I thought he might not respond. Finally, he turned toward me, his face barely visible in the dim light filtering through our bedroom windows. "We've both been busy," he said, his voice careful. "It's been an intense year." "It has," I agreed. "But it's more than that, isn't it?" Another long pause. "I don't know what you want me to say, Liv." "The truth," I whispered. "Whatever it is." "The truth is, we're both exactly where we've always wanted to be," he said finally. "Successful careers, beautiful home, each other." It was the right answer, the expected answer, yet something about it felt hollow. A recitation of facts rather than an emotional truth. "Then why does it feel like we're further apart than ever?" I asked. "It's just a phase," Scott assured me, pulling me closer, his arm around my waist feeling both comforting and somehow restrictive. "Every marriage has them. We'll find our way back." I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. So I nodded against his chest and closed my eyes, ignoring the nagging voice that whispered this was more than a phase. This was a foundation beginning to crack. The first undeniable sign came on a Wednesday evening in late October, nearly 2 months after our 9th anniversary dinner. I'd been leading a day-long strategy session for a new client and arrived home exhausted but satisfied, looking forward to a glass of wine and the pasta dish Scott had promised to make. Instead, I found the kitchen dark and empty. A text message. Waiting on my phone. "Client crisis. Don't wait until dinner. Might be a late one." Not unusual in our world of demanding careers and high-profile clients. I reheated leftovers, caught up on industry news, and was half asleep when Scott finally came home just after midnight. "Sorry about dinner," he whispered, slipping into bed, beside me. Bradford account blew up unexpectedly. "Everything okay now?" I murmured, already drifting back toward sleep. "Under control," he assured me, keeping his distance on his side of the bed. It was the scent that woke me fully. Unfamiliar, distinctly feminine, not my perfume. My eyes opened in the darkness, suddenly alert. The fragrance lingered faintly, in the air between us, a presence where there should have been none. "Scott?" I said, more sharply than I'd intended. "Hmm?" His voice was heavy with either fatigue or feigned sleepiness. I hesitated, the question forming and dissolving on my tongue. Was I truly prepared to ask? To hear the answer? To disrupt our carefully constructed life over a scent that could have a perfectly innocent explanation? "Never mind," I said finally. "We'll talk in the morning." But morning brought its own routine. Rushed. Showers, quick coffee, separate Ubers to our respective offices. The conversation never happened. The question never asked. The scent never mentioned. Just one more unspoken thing between us. I pushed the incident from my mind, attributing my suspicion to exhaustion and the distance that had been growing between us. Scott had never given me reason to doubt his fidelity. Emotional withdrawal, yes. Decreased intimacy, certainly. But cheating? That seemed like a leap my rational mind wasn't prepared to make. 2 weeks later, reviewing our credit card statement online, I noticed a charge I didn't recognize. $317 at Mason's, an upscale restaurant downtown that we hadn't visited in years. The date corresponded with one of Scott's late client meetings the previous month, again, potentially innocent. Client dinners were part of his job, but something about it niggled at me. The amount seemed high for a business meal, and Mason's was known more for its romantic atmosphere than its suitability for professional discussions. When Scott came home that evening, I mentioned it casually. "Hey, I saw a charge for Mason's on the statement. Big client dinner?" He was at the refrigerator, his back to me as he answered. "Oh yeah, Bradford team, celebrating the account renewal." "Must have been quite a celebration," I remarked, keeping my tone light. "Over $300. "Wine gets expensive," he replied with a shrug, turning to face me with a beer in hand. "You know how these things go. Clients expect a certain level of hospitality." I nodded, studying his expression. Nothing seemed overtly deceptive. His explanation was plausible, his manner relaxed. Yet something felt off, a subtle disconnection between his words and some indefinable truth. "Speaking of client events," I said, changing the subject. "The Crawford and Burke holiday party is December 12th. Should I RSVP for both of us?" "Absolutely," Scott replied, seeming relieved by the topic shift. "Looking forward to it." Thanksgiving arrived with its traditional obligations, dinner with Scott's family in Lake Forest. We performed our roles perfectly, the successful power couple sharing news of recent professional achievements, answering his mother's increasingly pointed questions about grandchildren with practiced deflection, helping his father carve the turkey with the knife set we'd given them 3 Christmases ago. "You two are always so busy," Scott's mother remarked as we helped clean up after dinner. "I worry you're going to wake up one day and realize life passed you by while you were working." "That's not going to happen, Mom," Scott assured her, the same answer he gave every year to variations of the same concern. "We're busy but happy," I added, the familiar script rolling off my tongue even as I wondered how true it still was. On the drive home, unusual silence filled the car. Typically, we'd dissect the family dynamics, laugh about his mother's predictable comments, share observations that were better kept private. This time, we retreated to our separate thoughts, the space between us growing with each mile. "Everything okay?" I finally asked as we approached the city skyline. Scott glanced over, seeming surprised by the question. "Fine, just tired. Holiday food coma." "You've been quiet lately," I pressed gently. "More than usual." His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Just work stress, end-of-year projections. The usual." "You'd tell me if it was something else, right?" Scott reached over and squeezed my hand briefly before returning his to the wheel. "Of course, you're my best friend." The phrase, once a cornerstone of our relationship, now felt like a deflection rather than a reassurance. December arrived with its characteristic frenzy: holiday client events, end-of-year deadlines, social obligations that couldn't be avoided. Scott and I moved through it all with practiced coordination, our shared calendar a complex matrix of commitments that left little time for addressing the growing distance between us. The Crawford and Burke holiday party represented a rare evening. Together, I wore a new dress, emerald green, fitted, with an open back that Scott had always favored. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, the silver at his temples lending him a distinguished air that drew appreciative glances from my colleagues. "Power. Couple alert," my assistant whispered as we entered the hotel ballroom where the party was being held. "Everyone's jealous, you know. If only they knew how hollow that power felt, how disconnected we'd become beneath the polished exterior." For the first hour, Scott played his role perfectly, charming my co-workers, asking thoughtful questions about their projects, keeping my wine glass filled. But as the evening progressed, I noticed his attention drifting, his responses becoming more automatic. Twice, I caught him checking his phone when he thought I wasn't looking. During a momentary lull, when Scott was engaged in conversation with our CEO, I excused myself to the restroom. As I returned through the hotel lobby, I spotted Scott near the entrance, phone to his ear. Expression intense. He hadn't mentioned expecting an important call. I hesitated, torn between giving him privacy and satisfying the growing unease that had taken root in my chest. Before I could decide, he finished the call, slipping his phone into his pocket with a glance around that didn't include the corner where I stood partially hidden by a large holiday display. When I rejoined him at our table minutes later, I said nothing about the call. But the question hovered between us, adding to the collection of unasked questions that were becoming our marriage's defining feature. "Ready to head out?" Scott suggested around 11, earlier than the party would typically end. "I've got an early meeting tomorrow." On the ride home, I finally found the courage to ask, "Who called you at the party?" Scott's expression remained neutral, his eyes on the road. "Johnson. Question about the year-end report." Must have been important to step out of the party. You know how he is. Everything's urgent in Johnson's world. I nodded, letting it go despite the unease that continued to churn inside me. One question asked, dozens more swallowed back. The week before Christmas, I was working late at the office, putting final touches on a presentation due before the holiday break. My assistant had long since gone home. The creative department floor, dark except for the light from my office. When my cell phone rang just after 9, I answered without checking the display, assuming it was Scott checking when I'd be home. "Mrs. Daniels?" An unfamiliar female voice asked. "Yes, this is Olivia Daniels," I replied, straightening in my chair. "This is Tracy from the Grand Wellington Hotel. I'm calling about the scarf you left in the lounge last evening. One of our staff found it, and the contact information in our system directed me to this number." I frowned, confusion replacing my initial professional response. "I think there's been a mistake. I wasn't at the Grand Wellington yesterday." A pause on the line. "Oh, I apologize. Our records show a Scott Daniels checked in with a dining reservation for 2 at our Lakeside Lounge at 7:30 p.m. We assumed the lady's scarf left at the table belonged to his companion." My blood ran cold, the office suddenly seeming airless despite the efficient HVAC system. "I see," I managed to say, my voice remarkably steady despite the churning in my stomach. "My husband must have been there with a colleague. I can let him know about the scarf." "Wonderful," Tracy replied, oblivious to the bombshell she'd just dropped. "It will be held at the front desk for pickup at his convenience." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, the presentation forgotten on my computer screen. Scott had told me he was having dinner with the Bradford client team at their offices last night, a casual working meal to finalize year-end reports. Not an intimate dinner for 2 at one of Chicago's most expensive hotels. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my phone again, opening our shared credit card app. There it was, a pending charge from the Grand Wellington Hotel Lakeside Lounge, $374.26, time-stamped 10:23 p.m. yesterday. A business dinner wouldn't be on our personal card. A working meal at a client's office wouldn't generate a charge at an upscale hotel restaurant. And a mysterious woman's scarf wouldn't be left behind after a team meeting about financial reports. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The late nights, the vague explanations, the emotional distance, the mysterious scent on that October night, the call during the holiday party. Scott was having an affair. The realization hit me with physical force, knocking the air from my lungs. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself as the room seemed to tilt around me. For several minutes, I simply sat there, breathing deliberately, forcing oxygen into lungs that seemed to have forgotten their purpose. When the initial shock subsided, a strange calm descended, the clarity that comes when a mystery is finally solved, when uncertainty is replaced by unwelcome knowledge. The distance between us hadn't been my imagination. The growing disconnection hadn't been a natural phase of marriage. It had been betrayal, methodically executed by the person I trusted most. I gathered my things mechanically, shut down my computer, and made my way to the elevator. In the quiet of the deserted office building, I considered my options. I could confront Scott immediately, demand explanations, throw accusations. I could pretend ignorance, gather more evidence, and build an irrefutable case. I could call Rebecca, seek counsel from the one person who knew us both, but would unquestionably be on my side. Instead, I found myself directing my Uber driver to the Grand Wellington Hotel. "I'll just be a moment," I told the driver as we pulled up to the gleaming entrance. "Picking something up." The hotel lobby was decorated for Christmas. Tasteful greenery, subtle golden lights, a massive tree adorned with burgundy and gold ornaments. At the front desk, a young woman looked up with a professional smile. "Good evening. How may I assist you?" "My name is Olivia Daniels," I said, keeping my voice level. "I believe you have a scarf for me? My husband, Scott Daniels, was here last night." "Of course, Mrs. Daniels. One moment while I check." As she turned to a cabinet behind the counter, I added casually, "My husband mentioned he left his business. Card case as well. Has that turned up by any chance?" "I don't see a note about that," she replied, returning with a small bag containing a silk scarf in shades of blue and purple. "Definitely not mine. But I can check with housekeeping if you'd like." "That would be helpful," I said. "It would have been in the lounge, or possibly in room 812. I took a calculated risk with the room number, watching her face carefully for a reaction. Her expression remained professionally blank as she tapped at her computer. "I don't show room. 812 assigned to Mr. Daniels last night," she said after a moment. "Just the dining reservation." "My mistake," I replied with a small laugh. "He must have mentioned meeting a colleague who was staying here. Sorry for the confusion." She handed me the bag with the scarf. "No problem at all. Will there be anything else?" "That's everything. Thank you." In the back of the Uber, I examined the scarf. Expensive silk, designer label, a distinctive pattern that seemed vaguely familiar though I couldn't place it. Not a generic item someone would forget easily. Had it been left behind intentionally? A reason for contact? For another meeting? By the time I arrived home, Scott was already there, laptop open on the kitchen island, reading glasses perched on his nose, the picture of domestic industry. "Hey," he said, glancing up with a distracted smile. "Wasn't sure you were ever coming. Home? Big presentation tomorrow?" "Something like that," I replied, hanging my coat by the door, the bag with the scarf hidden in my tote. "How was your client's dinner?" "Productive," Scott said, returning his attention to his laptop. "Finally got Bradford to sign off on the year-end adjustments." The lie rolled off his tongue so easily, without hesitation or tell. Has it always been this way? Had I simply never noticed, or had he perfected the art of deception over time? "Good," I said, heading for the stairs. "I'm going to take a bath. It's been a long day." "Sounds nice," he replied absently. "I'll be up in a bit." In our bathroom, I locked the door, something I never did, and ran water hot enough to steam the mirrors. As the tub filled, I sat on the edge, the mysterious scarf spread across my lap. I should have been crying, screaming, throwing things. Instead, I felt a strange detachment, as if I were observing someone else's marriage disintegration rather than experiencing my own. When did it start? Who was she? Did he love her, or was it just physical? How much of our life together had been real, and how much carefully maintained fiction? Questions circled like vultures, but I pushed them away. There would be time for answers later. For now, I needed to decide what to do with this knowledge, how to proceed in a way that preserved my dignity and protected my future. That night, lying beside Scott in our king-sized bed, I felt as though we were separated by an ocean, rather than inches. He slept peacefully, unaware that everything had changed, that the foundation of our marriage had been revealed as fundamentally flawed. I stared at the ceiling, watching shadows move across it as occasional cars passed outside. 10 years of my life invested in a relationship that had become a lie. A decade of shared dreams, mutual support, intertwined identities, all undermined by whatever was happening beyond my knowledge. Tomorrow, I decided as dawn approached and sleep continued to elude me, I would begin investigating properly. No emotional confrontations, no accusations without evidence, no opportunity for gaslighting or denial. If our marriage was ending, and in my heart I knew it already had, I would ensure it ended on my terms, with complete clarity about what had transpired. As the first light of morning filtered through our bedroom windows, I made a silent promise to myself. I would uncover the full truth, whatever it might be. And when I did, I would act not from emotion, but from a position of strength and self-respect. Scott stirred beside me, reaching automatically across the bed in his half-awake state. I moved slightly beyond his grasp, a small but significant withdrawal that he was too asleep to notice, but that symbolized the much larger withdrawal to come. The investigation had begun. The mysterious scarf remained hidden in my desk drawer at work, tangible evidence of something I couldn't yet name but could no longer ignore. I didn't confront Scott about it, didn't mention the call from the Grand Wellington. Instead, I began paying attention in ways I hadn't before, cataloging discrepancies, noting patterns, gathering information. 2 days after discovering the scarf, I created a new document on my personal laptop, not our shared home computer, titled simply Notes. In it, I began recording details, dates of Scott's late nights, explanations given, credit card charges that didn't align with his stated whereabouts. Each entry was factual, unemotional, as if I were preparing a case study for a client rather than documenting my husband's betrayal. The Christmas holidays provided a temporary reprieve. We spent Christmas Eve with my parents in Virginia, Christmas Day with Scott's family in Lake Forest. Surrounded by relatives and holiday traditions, Scott seemed more present, more like his old self. He held my hand during my father's elaborate toast, laughed genuinely at my mother's stories, helped his nieces assemble their new toys with patient attention. Standing in my parents' kitchen, watching Scott through the doorway as he explained the mechanics of a remote-controlled car to my nephew, my mother sidled up beside me. "Everything okay with you two?" she asked quietly, her professor's eyes missing nothing. "Why do you ask?" I countered, buying time. She shrugged, arranging cookies on a serving plate. "Mother's intuition. You seem distant from each other, less in sync than usual." I considered deflecting, offering the easy excuse of work stress or year-end fatigue. But this was my mother, who had always seen through my carefully constructed facades. "I'm not sure," I admitted, keeping my voice low. "Something feels off. Has for a while." She nodded, unsurprised. "Have you talked to him about it?" "Not really. We're both so busy, and then there never seems to be the right moment, and—" I trailed off, aware I was making excuses. "The right moment rarely announces itself, sweetheart," she said gently. "Sometimes you have to create it." I nodded, knowing she was right, but not yet ready to act on her wisdom. Whatever conversation Scott and I needed to have, whatever truth lay beneath the growing mountain of inconsistencies, I wasn't prepared to confront it during the holidays, in our parents' homes, surrounded by the expectations of family harmony. The week between Christmas and New Year's, traditionally a quiet period for both our firms, offered the opportunity for connection. We stayed in Chicago, enjoying leisurely mornings in our brownstone, catching up on books and shows we'd neglected during the hectic fall season. Scott suggested a day at the Art Institute, followed by dinner at a new restaurant that had been impossible to get reservations for during the regular season. Walking through the museum's Impressionist gallery, Scott's hand warm in mine, I could almost convince myself that my suspicions were unfounded. The product of insecurity, overwork, imagination run wild. This was my husband, my partner of a decade, the man who still looked at Monet's water lilies with the same quiet appreciation he'd shown on our third date at this very museum. "Remember when we came here right after that blizzard?" he asked, as if reading my thoughts. The museum was practically empty, and we had the entire American Gothic exhibit to ourselves, I finished, the memory clear despite the years that had passed. "You kept making up ridiculous backstories for the farmers in the painting," Scott laughed, squeezing my hand. They were clearly hiding a dark secret. His expression gave it away. This easy rapport, the shared memories, the inside jokes, they were real, weren't they? Not just performances we enacted out of habit or obligation. At dinner that night, in the warm glow of candlelight, Scott raised his wine glass. "To a new year," he said, his eyes meeting mine, "and recommitting to what matters most." I clinked my glass against his, hope fluttering in my chest. "And what matters most to you, Scott?" He held my gaze, something vulnerable flashing briefly in his expression. Us. This. Getting back to who we were before we got so distracted. "I'd like that," I said softly. "I've missed us." His hand found mine across the table, fingers intertwining as they had countless times before. Me too. That night, our lovemaking had an intensity, an emotional connection that had been absent for months. Afterward, lying in Scott's arms, I felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps whatever had come between us, whether another woman or simply the accumulated distance of two demanding careers, was behind us now. Perhaps we could find our way back to each other, rebuild what had begun to crumble. New Year's Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed Chicago into a winter wonderland. We had tickets to a charity gala at the Drake Hotel, an annual tradition in our social circle, an opportunity to network while supporting causes we cared about. I wore a new dress, silver, backless, more daring than my usual style, and Scott's appreciative gaze as I emerged from our bedroom sent a warm flush across my skin. "You look incredible," he said, adjusting his bow tie. "I'll be the envy of every man there." The ballroom was a glittering spectacle of Chicago's business elite, CEOs, marketing executives, financial leaders, all in their formal finery, champagne flowing freely as a jazz quartet played classic standards. Scott and I moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting colleagues, accepting compliments, participating in the elaborate social dance that was part of our professional existence. Around 11, as I returned from the ladies' room, I spotted Scott near the bar, engaged in conversation with a striking woman in a deep blue gown. Something in their posture, the slight lean toward each other, the familiar way she touched his arm while laughing, sent a jolt of recognition through me. This wasn't a casual professional interaction. There was history here, intimacy. I approached, slowly, observing their body language, the animated expression on Scott's face. More engaged, more present than he'd been in conversations with me for months. As I drew closer, the woman glanced up, seeing me before Scott did. Something flickered across her features, recognition, perhaps even guilt, before her expression smoothed into polite neutrality. Scott turned, following her gaze, surprise evident in his expression. "Olivia, there you are. I was just about to look for you." He gestured to the woman. "This is Melissa Winters. She's a jewelry designer who's been consulting on a new product line for some of Hamilton's wealth management clients. Melissa, my wife, Olivia." Melissa extended her hand, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Lovely to meet you, Olivia. Scott talks about you all the time. As we shook hands, I noticed the earrings she wore, distinctive rose gold pieces with subtle initials worked into the design. Something about them tugged at my memory, a connection I couldn't quite make but felt certain was important. Likewise, I replied, my social training kicking in despite the unease spreading through my chest. How long have you been working with Hamilton? About 8 months, she answered smoothly. Scott's been instrumental in helping us understand the financial services perspective. Creative types like me need translation sometimes. 8 months. The timeline aligned perfectly with when I'd first noticed changes in Scott's behavior. Melissa's studio is in Soho, Scott added. She splits her time between New York and Chicago. How convenient, I remarked, keeping my tone light despite the implications flooding my mind. Scott's increased travel to New York, the nights he claimed to be working late, the mysterious scent of perfume, all suddenly had a potential explanation, one I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to confirm. Very, Melissa agreed, something knowing, in her gaze as it flickered between Scott and me. Though I'm looking to establish a more permanent base here in Chicago. The market for custom jewelry is surprisingly robust in the Midwest. Before I could respond, the band began playing more loudly, signaling the approach of midnight. Around us, couples gravitated toward each other, champagne flutes in hand, ready for the traditional New Year's kiss. Shall we? Scott asked, offering me his arm, a hint of relief in his expression at the timely interruption. As the countdown began around us, I stood beside my husband, champagne in hand, watching Melissa drift into the crowd, her blue gown disappearing among the revelers. 10 seconds until a new year. 10 seconds until I could no longer pretend that the holidays had healed whatever was broken between us. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Scott turned to me, his kiss landing perfectly on my lips, his arm around my waist appropriately. Affectionate. The picture of a loving husband greeting the new year with his wife. Around us, couples embraced, friends clinked glasses, confetti drifted from the ceiling like metallic snow. Happy New Year, Liv, Scott whispered against my ear, the familiar nickname now feeling like a performance for the benefit of watching eyes rather than a genuine endearment. Happy New Year, I echoed, my mind already racing ahead to what this year would truly bring. Confrontation, revelation, perhaps the end of everything we'd built together. Later that night, as Scott slept beside me, I slipped out of bed and retrieved my laptop. In the soft glow of the screen, I searched for Melissa Winters Jewelry Designer and found her immediately, her professional website showcasing her distinctive pieces, her Instagram account filled with artistic photos of her work, interspersed with glimpses of her lifestyle. I scrolled through her recent posts, my heart pounding as connections formed with increasing clarity. There she was at the Grand Wellington Hotel's Lakeside Lounge 2 weeks ago, a selfie capturing her earring with the distinctive Chicago skyline visible through the window behind her. The same earrings she'd worn tonight. Another post showed her workspace in what appeared to be a downtown Chicago condo, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the river. The caption, temporary Chicago studio until I find the perfect permanent space. Be coastal life, Chicago designer. I continued scrolling, moving back through her timeline. October, a close-up of her hand holding a wine glass, a masculine hand visible. At the edge of the frame, the sleeve of a navy blazer just in view. Scott's favorite blazer, the one he claimed had been at the dry cleaners when I'd asked about it the following day. September, a sunset view from what appeared to be a hotel. Balcony with the caption, business trips don't have to be all business. Chicago sunset Altars work hard, play hard. The date aligned with Scott's financial conference in downtown Chicago, the one he'd insisted required him to stay at a hotel near the venue, despite our home being less than 30 minutes away by car. August. A photo of a bracelet design spread across what I recognized with sickening certainty as the distinctive marble-topped table in Scott's office at Hamilton Financial. Client meetings all day. At least the view is inspiring. Our jewelry designer, our custom creations. The evidence accumulated post by post, month by month, creating a timeline of connection that paralleled the growing distance in my marriage. This wasn't a recent development, a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained relationship, deliberately hidden, carefully maintained alongside his marriage to me. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling slightly as the full impact settled over me. The woman in blue at the New Year's gala wasn't just a colleague or casual affair. She was deeply intertwined with Scott's life, present in his professional spaces, accompanying him on trips, spending evenings in hotel restaurants on our personal credit card. And now I had a name, a face, an identity to attach to the growing collection of inconsistencies and lies. Sleep eluded me for the remainder of the night. I lay beside Scott, studying his familiar profile in the dim light filtering through our bedroom windows, trying to reconcile the man I'd married with the one who could sustain such elaborate deception. What else didn't I know about him? What other secrets lay beneath the surface of our supposedly transparent relationship? The next morning, as Scott prepared for his traditional New Year's Day run along the lakefront, I casually mentioned Melissa. She seemed interesting, I remarked, sipping my coffee at the kitchen island. How long did you say she's been consulting with Hamilton? Scott adjusted his running watch, his expression carefully neutral. Since last spring, I think. Mark brought her in initially for the Women's Wealth Initiative, but her designs caught the attention of the executive team. She mentioned spending more time in Chicago, I continued, watching his reaction closely. Seems to be building quite a presence. Here. That's the plan, he agreed. Having her closer will make the collaboration more efficient. The ease with which he discussed her, the absence of any telltale hesitation or discomfort, it was as if he'd compartmentalized so completely that he could speak of his mistress to his wife without missing a beat. The realization was somehow more disturbing than the affair itself. Well, don't let me keep you from your run, I said, forcing a smile. I'm heading to the gym later, but I thought we could do brunch at Maple and Ash when you get back. Perfect, Scott replied, dropping a kiss on my cheek before heading to the door. See you in about an hour. As soon as he was gone, I returned to my laptop, diving deeper into Melissa Winters' online presence. Her LinkedIn profile revealed she had attended Northwestern, not during our time there, but several years later. Had she and Scott connected through alumni networks, professional events? The initial meeting was still a missing piece of the puzzle. I checked our shared calendar, scrolling back through the previous year, noting the increase in Scott's client dinners and team meetings beginning in April, around the time Melissa would have started consulting with Hamilton, according to both their stories. Next, I reviewed our credit card statements for the past year, downloading them into a spreadsheet and highlighting charges that couldn't be easily explained. Restaurants I'd never visited, hotels in Chicago, unusually expensive wine shops, a charge at a high-end jewelry store in early December that Scott had explained as a client gift. A more thorough pattern emerged, not just of deception but of escalation. What might have begun as professional collaboration had clearly evolved into something more personal, more intimate, more threatening to our marriage. The question now was what to do with this knowledge. Confront Scott directly? Hire a private investigator to document the affair more conclusively? Consult a divorce attorney to understand my options? The thought of divorce, of dismantling the life we'd built over a decade, sent a wave of nausea through me. Despite everything, despite the mounting evidence of Scott's betrayal, some part of me still hoped for an explanation, an alternative interpretation, a path back to what we'd once had. But the rational part of me, the strategic thinker who had built campaigns and guided clients through brand crises, knew better. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary lapse. This was systematic deception, a parallel relationship that had been developing for the better part of a year, while I remained oblivious, focused on my career and our supposed partnership. By the time Scott returned from his run, cheeks flushed. From the cold, I had composed myself, tucked away my research, and prepared to continue the performance of normalcy, at least until I decided my next move. "Ready for brunch?" he asked, dropping his running gloves on the counter. "Just need to shower and change," I replied, my smile not reaching my eyes. "How was the lakefront?" "Beautiful. Hardly anyone out because of the holiday. Small talk. Weather. Observations. Schedule coordination." The rituals of marriage continued even as the foundation crumbled beneath them. That night, lying awake long after Scott had fallen asleep, I made a decision. I would not confront him without irrefutable evidence. I would not give him the opportunity to deny, deflect, or diminish what I now knew with increasing certainty. I would investigate thoroughly, document meticulously, and when the time came to address the betrayal, I would do so from a position of complete knowledge and careful preparation. This wasn't just about uncovering the full extent of Scott's affair with Melissa Winters. It was about reclaiming my agency in a situation where I had been unknowingly cast as the deceived wife. If my marriage was ending, and I was beginning to accept that it likely was, I would ensure it ended on my terms, with my dignity intact and my future secured. The new year had begun with painful clarity about the past. What remained uncertain was what the coming months would bring, and whether the woman who had shared Scott's life for a decade would still recognize herself when the dust finally settled. It's been exactly 1 year since I stood in Melissa Winters' doorway, divorce papers in hand, watching my husband's face transform from shock to shame to resignation. 1 year since I walked away from a decade-long marriage that had become more performance than partnership. 1 year of rebuilding, rediscovering, and reclaiming myself. I'm speaking directly to you now. Yes, you. Because perhaps you're sitting alone right now, scrolling through your phone, looking for answers, validation, or simply the reassurance that someone else has survived what you're enduring. Perhaps you've just discovered a betrayal. Perhaps you're still in the suspicion phase, gathering evidence, trying to convince yourself you're overreacting. Perhaps you've already made the decision to leave but are terrified of what comes next. Wherever you are in your journey, I want you to know this. What feels like an ending can become the beginning of something far more authentic than what you're leaving behind. The days following my confrontation with Scott and Melissa were a blur of logistics and legalities. Rebecca's guest room became my temporary sanctuary while I secured a bright corner apartment in a high-rise downtown, about as different from our historic brownstone as possible. That was deliberate. I needed spaces without memories, rooms that didn't echo with 10 years of shared history. Scott moved out of the brownstone 3 weeks after our confrontation. The house went on the market a month later, selling quickly to a young family who saw its potential as we once had. Walking through those rooms one final time, the kitchen where we'd hosted countless dinner parties, the library where I'd spent Sunday mornings reading by the window seat, the bedroom where we'd shared intimacies and dreams, I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt a curious lightness, as if setting down a burden I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. "You okay?" Rebecca asked as I locked the front door for the last time, handing the keys to our realtor. "Better than okay," I replied, surprised to find it was true. The divorce itself was remarkably uncomplicated. The prenuptial agreement we'd signed as ambitious young professionals with separate career trajectories provided a clear framework for dividing assets. Scott didn't contest any of my requests, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of a desire for quick resolution so he could move forward with Melissa, perhaps simply because the terms were fair. What proved more complex was untangling our social connections. explaining the sudden dissolution of a marriage many had considered exemplary. Some friends took sides immediately, Rebecca and my closest colleagues firmly in my corner, Scott's fraternity brothers and golfing partners maintaining their allegiance to him. Others seemed uncomfortable with the messiness of real human emotion breaking through our previously polished facade. "But you two were perfect together," was a refrain I heard often, usually accompanied by expressions of disbelief or disappointment, as if our divorce were a personal affront to those who had invested in the narrative of our ideal partnership. "Apparently not," became my standard response, delivered with a small smile that discouraged further questions. My parents, after their initial concern, proved to be my strongest supporters. My mother, with her academic's analytical mind, helped me process the experience intellectually. My father, whose gentle emotional intelligence had always been his defining characteristic, provided the space for me to simply feel what needed to be felt without judgment or impatience. "I should have seen it coming," I told them during a weekend visit to Virginia 3 months after the separation. "There were so many signs." "Hindsight creates patterns that weren't visible in the moment," my mother observed, her professor's perspective bringing clarity as always. "Don't mistake retrospective understanding for failure to see what was happening." 6 months post-divorce, I received a text from Scott, our first communication that wasn't filtered through lawyers or related to practical matters of separation. "Heard about your promotion to executive creative director. Congratulations. You deserve it." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. Finally, I typed, "Thank you." His reply came quickly. "I'm sorry, Olivia. For everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that." This time, I didn't respond, not out of anger or bitterness, but because there was simply nothing left to say. The apology was noted, accepted for what it was worth, but it didn't alter the reality we now occupied, separate lives moving in different directions. I later heard through mutual connections that Scott and Melissa had moved in together, purchasing a modern condo with river views. The news landed with far less impact than I might have expected even a few months earlier. Their story was no longer intertwined with mine, their choices no longer relevant to my path forward. My own path has been surprisingly vibrant. The promotion Scott referenced came with challenges that absorbed my professional energy in the most satisfying ways. Leading a creative team through a major agency transition demanded all my strategic skills and then some, leaving little time for dwelling on the past. Outside of work, I've been rediscovering aspects of myself that had been subsumed by marriage, taking ceramics classes that get my hands dirty in ways my polished executive life rarely allows, joining a women's hiking group that explores trails throughout the Midwest, reconnecting with college friends who knew me before I became half of Scott and Olivia. Dating has been an education. After a decade with one partner, navigating the changed landscape of romantic connection required adjustments, both practical, yes, I finally created dating app profiles, and philosophical. What exactly am I looking for now? There have been a few meaningful connections, one that lasted several months before we recognized our life directions weren't aligned. I'm currently seeing someone who makes me laugh, challenges my thinking, and respects my independence, all qualities I value more consciously now than I did in my 20s when Scott and I first connected. Whether this relationship develops into something lasting remains to be seen, and I'm comfortable with that uncertainty. The timeline pressure that drove so many of my previous life decisions, career milestones by certain ages, marriage at the right time, considerations of children, before it was too late, has largely dissipated. I'm learning to let things unfold at their natural pace, to evaluate relationships based on their actual quality rather than how they fit into some preconceived life plan. The question I'm asked most frequently, usually by well-meaning friends, or sometimes by new acquaintances who learn about my divorce, is whether I regret how I handled the confrontation. Wouldn't it have been easier, they wonder, to have a private conversation with Scott rather than the dramatic doorstep revelation? Wouldn't it have been more dignified to separate quietly, without the emotional scene at Melissa's apartment? My answer is always the same. I have zero regrets about choosing that moment of clarity over polite deception. What might appear dramatic to others was, for me, an act of reclaiming my own narrative. For too long, I had been a secondary character in the story Scott was writing. The supportive wife waiting at home while he built a relationship with someone else. The trusting partner, who accepted explanations that didn't quite add up. The career woman too busy with her own ambitions to notice the dissolution of her marriage. By appearing at that door with signed divorce papers, I stepped into the protagonist role of my own life. I made a deliberate choice to face the truth, directly, to acknowledge reality without flinching, to act from a place of hard-won knowledge rather than comfortable ignorance. Was it easy? Absolutely not. Standing in that hallway, watching two people I had trusted, yes, in that moment I realized I had trusted Melissa too, without ever meeting her, trusted her not to get involved with my husband, trusted her professional relationship with Scott to have boundaries. Try to process my unexpected appearance. It was one of the most difficult moments of my life, but it was also one of the most empowering. In that moment, I was not a victim to be pitied or a fool who had been deceived. I was a woman making a clear-eyed choice about her own future, refusing to participate any longer in a relationship built on fundamental dishonesty. The hardest lesson I've learned through this experience wasn't about Scott, or even about marriage. It was about myself, about how I had prioritized the appearance of success over the substance of genuine connection, how I had constructed a life that looked perfect from the outside while ignoring the growing emptiness within. Scott's affair with Melissa was a symptom, not the disease itself. Our marriage had been struggling long before he met her, weakened by mutual neglect, by careers that became all-consuming, by the gradual drift that happens when two people stop truly seeing each other. The betrayal was real and painful, but it emerged from fertile ground we had both allowed to develop. This isn't to excuse his choices. The decision to have an affair rather than address our problems directly, or simply to end our marriage honestly before beginning another relationship, was his alone, and the pain it caused was unnecessary and profound. But in the clarity that comes with distance, I can acknowledge my own role in creating a marriage where such disconnection was possible. I had accepted emotional distance as the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. I had prioritized professional achievements over personal growth. I had confused the trappings of success, the beautiful home, the enviable career, the polished social media presence, with actual fulfillment. These realizations didn't come quickly or easily. They emerged gradually, through countless therapy sessions, honest conversations with trusted friends, long solitary walks along Chicago's lakefront. They came through tears and anger, through moments of profound sadness for what might have been, through sparks of joy at discovering who I could still become. If you're facing a similar betrayal, I won't offer you platitudes about everything happening for a reason or time healing all wounds. Such sentiments, while well-intentioned, rarely provide comfort in the midst of genuine pain. Instead, I offer you this. You will survive this. Not only survive, but eventually thrive in ways you may not currently be able to imagine. The path won't be linear. You'll have days when grief knocks you sideways, when anger threatens to consume you, when doubt makes you question every decision. These emotions aren't weaknesses to be overcome, but natural responses to significant loss. Be gentle with yourself during this process. Seek support, professional guidance if possible, trusted friends and family if available. Create boundaries that protect your healing, whether that means limiting contact with your ex, taking a break from social media, or simply giving yourself permission to decline invitations when you need solitude. At the same time, remain open to the possibilities. that emerge from major life transitions. The end of my marriage created space for new friendships, new professional opportunities, new ways of defining success that are more aligned with my authentic self rather than external expectations. A year ago, standing in that hallway with divorce, papers in hand, I couldn't have predicted the woman I would become through this process. Stronger but also softer, more self-reliant but also more willing to be vulnerable, clear-eyed about life's disappointments but still open to its joys. If you're at the beginning of this journey, know that you're not alone. If you're in the midst of the hardest part, trust that it won't always feel this overwhelming. If you're further along, perhaps seeing the first glimmers of your new life taking shape, celebrate each step forward, no matter how small it may seem. The relationship that ended, whether through betrayal, gradual disconnection, or both, doesn't define you. It was a chapter, significant but not all-encompassing, in the continuing story of your life. You get to write what comes next. As for me, I'm embracing this new chapter with both hands. Last month, I submitted a proposal to my firm for a creative sabbatical. 3 months to work on a project I've been contemplating for years, a series of profiles highlighting women who have reinvented themselves after significant life transitions. The executive team approved it unanimously. Next week, I leave for the first of 12 interviews across the country. My apartment is sublet, my team is prepared for my temporary absence, and my suitcase is packed with comfortable shoes and no defined expectations beyond staying curious and present with each woman's story. For the first time in my adult life, I'm embarking on a journey without a detailed 5-year plan, without checkboxes to tick, without the pressure to optimize every experience. I'm simply following my curiosity, trusting that it will lead somewhere interesting, even if, perhaps especially if, that somewhere isn't what I initially imagined. 10 years with Scott taught me the value of strategic planning and clear objectives. The year since our divorce has taught me the equal importance of adaptability and openness to the unexpected. Both lessons shape who I am today. Not the woman I was when I stood in that hallway with divorce papers, not the driven MBA student who fell in love in a marketing seminar, but someone new emerging from the integration of all these experiences. If there's wisdom I've gained that might serve you in your own journey, it's this. Betrayal breaks something fundamental. Trust, security, your understanding of your own reality. But what grows in that broken place can be stronger, more authentic, more truly yours than what existed before. This isn't just positive thinking or motivational rhetoric. It's what I've lived. The woman who stood at Melissa's door a year ago was acting from a place of newfound clarity, but she was still defined largely by what was ending. The woman speaking to you now is defined by what she's creating. A life built on self-knowledge, intentional choices, and the hard-won understanding that real strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from moving through it with your integrity. Intact, wherever you are in your own story, just discovering betrayal, navigating the aftermath, rebuilding your life. Know that you have within you everything you need to not just survive, but eventually thrive. Trust that. Trust yourself. The path forward exists, even if you can't yet see where it leads. And when you reach the point where you can look back with clarity rather than pain, remember to extend some compassion to the person you were when the betrayal occurred. The one who trusted, who believed, who built a life with someone who ultimately proved unworthy of such gifts. That person wasn't foolish. That person was hopeful, loving, invested in possibilities. Those qualities aren't weaknesses to be discarded, but strengths to be reclaimed and redirected toward a future worthy of them. A year ago, I followed my husband to another woman's home and confronted a painful truth with clear eyes and a steady hand. Today, I'm following my own curiosity toward a future I'm creating one choice at a time. Tomorrow, who knows? And for the first time in my life, I'm completely comfortable with that uncertainty. That, perhaps, is the most unexpected gift to emerge from betrayal. The discovery that what lies beyond the carefully planned life may be exactly what your soul has been waiting for all along. Since beginning my journey of healing and rediscovery, I've learned that recovery doesn't follow a tidy timeline. There are moments when I feel completely liberated from the past, striding confidently into my new life. Then there are quiet evenings when a song or scent triggers a cascade of memories, not all painful, which sometimes makes them harder to process. It's the good memories, the genuine connections that existed alongside the deception, that can be most disorienting to reconcile. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting alone in a restaurant where Scott and I had once celebrated a career milestone. I hadn't planned to go there. It was a last-minute change when another place was too crowded. But suddenly, I was surrounded by echoes of a different life. The maitre d' even recognized me, asking where Mr. Daniels was this evening. For a moment, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the sensation that had accompanied so many discoveries during the investigation phase of my marriage's end. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of rushing to leave or forcing myself to stay out of some misguided principle, I simply acknowledged the reality. We're divorced now, but I'd still love that corner table if it's available. The evening became a quiet milestone, my first time reclaiming a shared place as solely my own. I ordered a dish I'd always wanted to try, but had never selected because Scott preferred to share plates. I lingered over dessert and coffee, reading a novel rather than checking work emails. By the time I left, the restaurant had transformed from a site of shared history to simply a pleasant place where I had enjoyed an excellent meal. This process of reclamation has extended to many aspects of my life. The furniture I selected for my new apartment reflects my aesthetic alone, more contemporary, with bolder colors than the carefully neutral palette Scott and I had compromised on. My weekend schedule now includes activities I'd always been interested in, but had set aside to accommodate our joint social calendar. Perhaps most significantly, I've developed a new relationship with time itself. The rigid scheduling that characterized my marriage, color-coded calendars, efficiency-optimized routines, productivity as the primary measure of a day's worth, has given way to something more flexible. I still maintain the organizational skills that make me effective professionally, but I've created space for serendipity, for plans that change based on energy or inspiration rather than predetermined agendas. This shift hasn't always been comfortable. Structure provided safety, predictability, a sense of control that was particularly appealing after the foundation of my marriage proved so unstable. Learning to embrace uncertainty required confronting my deep-seated fear that without constant, forward momentum toward clear objectives, I might somehow lose my way. Therapy has been instrumental in this process. My therapist, Dr. Levine, helped me recognize how my achievement-oriented approach to life, while valuable in many contexts, had become a shield against vulnerability. If I was constantly focused on the next goal, the next project, the next milestone, I didn't have to fully inhabit the present moment with all its messy emotions and uncomfortable truths. "What if you didn't need to know exactly where you're heading next?" she asked during one particularly impactful session. "What if the path revealed itself one step at a time?" The question initially filled me with anxiety. My entire adult life had been structured around 5-year plans and clear objectives. The thought of proceeding without that framework felt like setting sail without a map. "But what if I make the wrong choice?" I asked. "What if I waste time heading in a direction that doesn't pan out?" Dr. Levine's response has stayed with me. "Perhaps there are no wrong choices, only different paths with different lessons. Perhaps time spent exploring isn't wasted, but invested in discovering what truly resonates with your authentic self." This perspective has gradually transformed how I approach decisions. When Crawford & Burke offered me the opportunity to open their new West Coast office, a prestigious promotion that would have perfectly aligned with my previous career trajectory, I gave myself permission to consider how the role would affect my overall quality of life, not just my professional advancement. After thoughtful consideration, I declined the position, proposing instead the creative sabbatical project that better aligned with my evolving priorities. The firm's positive response surprised me and illustrated how often our self-imposed limitations are more restrictive than external constraints. My relationship with my parents has deepened through this period as well. Their academic world had always seemed separate from my corporate existence, our conversations focusing on intersection points like career achievements or shared intellectual interests. Now, our discussions range more widely, delving into philosophical questions about purpose and fulfillment that would have seemed impractically abstract to my former self. During a recent visit to their Virginia home, my father and I spent an afternoon hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a tradition from my childhood that we had abandoned as my adult schedule became increasingly crowded. "You remind me of yourself as a teenager," he commented as we paused to admire a particularly stunning vista. Curious, observant, less concerned with measuring progress than with experiencing the journey. His observation startled me. I had always viewed my ambitious adult self as an evolution, an improvement on the less focused person I'd been in youth. The possibility that I might have lost something valuable in that transformation had never occurred to me. "Is that a good thing?" I asked. My father smiled. "It's neither good nor bad, but it seems to suit you now in a way that perhaps your previous approach no longer did." Friends have noticed the shift as well. Rebecca, who stood by me through the darkest moments of discovery and divorce, remarked on the change during a weekend getaway to Michigan's wine country, another activity my previous self would have considered insufficiently productive to justify the time investment. "You laugh more easily now," she observed as we sat on a winery terrace, watching sunset paint the vineyards gold. "And you listen differently, more present, less like you're mentally solving 3 problems while having a conversation." Her comment made me realize how much of my life I had experienced at a remove, part of my attention always directed toward the next task, the next challenge, the next achievement. The betrayal that ended my marriage had forced me fully into the present moment, with all its pain and uncertainty. Having survived that intensity, I found myself more capable of presence in moments of joy as well. This isn't to suggest that betrayal was somehow beneficial or necessary. I would never recommend infidelity as a pathway to personal growth. The pain it causes is real and significant. But I have come to believe that how we respond to betrayal can become a catalyst for transformation if we're willing to engage with the difficult questions it raises about our identities, our relationships, and our futures. For me, one of those difficult questions involved forgiveness, not as an abstract concept, but as a practical consideration. Did I need to forgive Scott to move forward? Was forgiveness even possible, given the systematic deception that had characterized the final year of our marriage? These questions occupied countless therapy sessions and solitary reflections. The cultural narrative around forgiveness often presents it as both necessary and noble, the enlightened response to wrongdoing, the path to spiritual freedom. Yet when confronted with genuine betrayal, such platitudes felt insufficient, even dismissive of the legitimate anger and hurt I was experiencing. What I've come to understand is that forgiveness isn't a single decision or declaration. It's a process that unfolds gradually and often unevenly. There are days when I feel compassion for Scott, recognizing that his choices likely stemmed from his own unresolved issues and limitations. There are other days when anger resurfaces, sharp and clarifying in its intensity. Both responses are valid. Both contribute to my ongoing integration of this experience into the larger narrative of my life. Forgiveness, I've realized, isn't about erasing the past or minimizing harm done. It's about gradually releasing the hold that betrayal has on my present and future, not for Scott's benefit, but for my own. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I received an invitation to the wedding of mutual friends, a couple who had been part of our social circle throughout our marriage. The invitation was addressed to me alone, an acknowledgement of our new reality. Attending would mean potentially seeing Scott, possibly meeting Melissa in a social context, certainly fielding questions and managing others' discomfort with our changed status. My initial instinct was to decline. The event seemed like unnecessary emotional labor, a regression into a social dynamic I had worked hard to move beyond. But after sitting with the decision for a few days, I realized that avoiding the wedding out of fear or discomfort contradicted the woman I was becoming. Someone who faced reality directly, who trusted herself to navigate difficult situations with dignity. I RSVP'd, yes, purchased a new dress that made me feel confident, and arranged to attend with Rebecca as my +1. The day of the wedding, I felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. This would be a test of sorts, of my healing, my emotional resilience, my capacity to engage with my past without being consumed by it. Scott was there, as I'd anticipated. So was Melissa, wearing an understated navy dress and minimal jewelry, nothing like the elaborate pieces showcased on her professional Instagram. They were seated at a different table, their body language suggesting mild discomfort when they first noticed my presence. The expected awkwardness materialized in various forms throughout the evening. Friends who bounced their gaze between us, like spectators at a tennis match. Conversations that carefully avoided any mention of relationships or the past. The inevitable moment at the bar when Scott and I found ourselves waiting for drinks simultaneously. "You look well," he said, his voice carrying that hint of guardedness I had come to recognize during our final months together. "Thank you," I replied. "So do you." A pause, heavy with unspoken history. "I didn't expect to see you here," he admitted. "I almost didn't come," I acknowledged. "But these are my friends too. I'm not going to disappear from my own life." He nodded, something like respect briefly crossing his features. "That sounds like you. The real you, I mean." The comment stayed with me long after our brief exchange ended, after the wedding concluded, after Rebecca and I dissected the entire experience over late-night room service in our hotel. The real you. Had Scott seen aspects of my authentic self that I had suppressed or overlooked? Had our marriage's gradual erosion partly resulted from both of us performing versions of ourselves that became increasingly detached from our core identities? These questions don't have simple answers, and perhaps they don't need to. What matters is that I'm now approaching life with greater awareness of when I'm acting from authenticity versus obligation, when I'm making choices based on genuine desire versus external expectations. This shift extends to how I view potential romantic relationships. Dating in my late 30s has been an education in itself, not just in navigating apps and first meeting protocols, but in identifying what I truly want in partnership versus what I was conditioned to value. My marriage to Scott checked all the conventional boxes: similar educational backgrounds, complementary career paths, shared financial goals, mutual social compatibility. On paper, we were ideally matched. In reality, we gradually lost the emotional intimacy and genuine curiosity about each other that sustains true connection. Now, I find myself drawn to different qualities: emotional intelligence, self-awareness, the ability to discuss difficult topics directly, rather than via carefully crafted corporate speak. I'm less impressed by resume achievements and more attentive to how potential partners treat service workers, manage stress, and talk about former relationships. The man I'm currently seeing, Daniel, couldn't be more different from Scott in temperament and background. A landscape architect with a previous career as an environmental journalist, he brings a perspective to conversations that challenges and expands my thinking. Our connection developed slowly, friendship evolving into something deeper through hiking excursions, lengthy discussions about books, and shared volunteer work at a community garden. Whether this relationship continues long-term remains to be seen, and I'm comfortable with that uncertainty. What matters is that it feels genuine, mutually supportive, and free from the performance aspects that characterized so much of my marriage. This new approach extends beyond romantic relationships to all aspects of my life. I've become more selective about professional commitments, evaluating opportunities not just for career advancement, but for alignment with my values and interests. I've deepened connections with friends who energize and inspire me while allowing certain social obligations to fall away without guilt. Most significantly, I've developed a gentler relationship with myself, less driven by achievement, more accepting of complexity and occasional contradiction. The woman who stood at Melissa's door with divorce papers was acting from authentic self-respect, but she was still operating within a framework that valued control and definitive action above all else. The woman I'm becoming understands that strength sometimes looks like setting boundaries and walking away, but it can also manifest as vulnerability, uncertainty, or the courage to remain open despite past wounds. Both versions contain the truth. Both have something valuable to offer. If you're navigating the aftermath of betrayal, this integration of seemingly contradictory aspects of yourself may be part of your journey too. The anger that propels you to action and the grief that brings you to your knees. The clarity that comes from finally seeing the truth and the confusion about what that truth means for your future. The determination to protect yourself and the longing to remain capable of trust and intimacy. All of these responses can coexist. All are natural, human reactions to the destabilizing experience of having your understanding of reality fundamentally altered by someone else's deception. Be patient with this process. It unfolds according to its own timeline, not according to external expectations or self-imposed deadlines. Some days will bring measurable progress, moments when you feel reconnected to joy, capable of imagining a fulfilling future. Other days may find you revisiting painful memories, questioning decisions both past and present. This non-linear healing isn't regression. It's integration, the complex work of absorbing difficult experiences into your life narrative without being defined by them. Throughout this process, remain curious about who you're becoming. Betrayal changes us, not just through the pain it causes, but through the questions it forces us to confront, the strengths it reveals, the priorities it clarifies. The person who emerges from this crucible isn't simply your former self, minus a relationship. She's someone new, shaped by both the weight of experience and the lightness of possibilities not previously considered. My journey continues to evolve, bringing challenges and discoveries I couldn't have anticipated when I first discovered Scott's betrayal. Each day presents opportunities to choose authenticity over performance, genuine connection over superficial achievement, presence over distraction. I don't always succeed. Old patterns reassert themselves, fear of uncertainty occasionally resurfaces. The temptation to retreat into work-focused efficiency remains strong. But increasingly, I recognize these moments for what they are: habitual responses rather than authentic choices, and can gently redirect myself toward the life I'm now consciously creating. A life defined not by external markers of success or by relationships that look perfect from the outside, but by internal alignment, meaningful connection, and the courage to remain open to whatever comes next, wherever you are in your own journey. Just beginning to acknowledge painful truths, actively dismantling what no longer serves you, or building something new from the space that's been cleared. Know that you're not alone. The path isn't easy, but it leads toward authenticity, toward a life that may be more beautiful and fulfilling than anything you can currently imagine. Trust yourself. Trust the process. Trust that what feels like an ending may in fact be the beginning of your most authentic chapter yet. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.